So how many of you can relate to this family? Yeah, you don't have to. You're a little timid on hands, and so for the sake of family harmony, it's okay. I got your back, right? So the movie, While You Were Sleeping, and it's one of those hysterical scenes going in, is looking in here, and I think one of the reasons it's so funny is because we all seemingly, right, have these kinds of families, right? We'll be sitting and we'll be with Betty and I will be sitting and eating with family or in a dinner situation, and sometimes she'll lean over to me and, listening to the context of a conversation, she'll just lean over to me and whisper, "These potatoes are creamy." It's the inside joke in our family, right? But they're family. And in the movie and in families stick together, right? You know, it'd be strange. You might have all these different kinds of people in here and all kinds of different people, we'll say. Keep it nice, polite, right? In here, different. But they're family. Which is what our text, this Exodus 19, is about this morning. It's about family and these different kinds of people in this family. We're picking up from last week's sermon. Last week we talked about Abraham and how God had blessed Abraham. And God was going to make Abraham a nation, and God gave Abraham specific promises that he was going to fulfill. So let me catch you up from Abraham till ours today. Abraham had a son called Isaac. Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. The promise of God came through Jacob. Jacob had 4 wives and 12 sons and a mountain of headaches because of the sons. And he sat there and he had 12 sons, and through a set of circumstances, the second to the youngest son, Joseph, ends up getting sold in slavery in Egypt, which isn't a bad thing. It turns out to be a good thing because there's a famine up in the land, and Jacob takes all his family, all of them, and they move down to Egypt, and they live in Egypt, and everything is great, and everything is wonderful, and everybody's thriving. But 400 years later, they've turned from thriving into oppressed, beaten, harassed slaves who are desperately seeking God to come and deliver them. And so God sends a guy by the name of Moses. And he sends Moses in here, and he says that God says that through Moses, he's going to rescue his people. Rescue this family. And so, you know the story. It was coming out, and this is part of the tail end of the story. We'll get there, is going in. But it's this story of Moses bringing these people out of Egypt. And it's interesting how Exodus describes some of these people that God brings out. He sits there, and it says that there are people in the group that are coming out. We'll call them the complainers. They complained from the time Moses showed up. They complained about God. They complained about Moses. And if they didn't have something to complain about, they would pick something to complain about. They had the complainers. You had the people who were the followers, the willing people that jumped up and down and says, "Yes, I'll celebrate the Passover with you. Yes, I'll do all those laws. Yes, it's cool. We're going to get to go out of Egypt." They were the ones who were the enthusiastic and just did everything. Then you had the warriors. That's where I would fall, admittedly, right? The warriors, they were the ones, they sit there and says, "Wow, this desert is long. Wow, the desert is hot. Wow, we're walking across here. Oh my gosh, there's Egyptians following us. Oh my gosh, there's a water in front of us. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do?" They're the ones who would just worry and worry and worry. Then you had the ones who would praise. "Cool, we get to cross the desert. Cool, there's Egyptians following us. Cool, there's water in front of us. Cool, look at it, it's parted. Cool, God destroyed the Egyptians." And then he comes in, and there's ones that you might call, again, we'll call them the complainers again. Because they were the ones who sat there and says, "I don't like the water. I don't like the food." And then my favorite is the ones, "Are we there yet? I want to go home." And there's those who would simply sit and argue among themselves. If they didn't have any necessary thing really to argue among themselves at, they would make something up to argue among themselves. But all these people that comes out, and God brings this group of people, this disjointed group of people, he brings them to Mount Sinai, leads them to his mountain, and he sits there, and this is one of the words from our reading from Exodus 19, verse 5. Listen to these words, what God is telling the people. He says, you, remember he's talking to you, speaking to this group of people here. Get my place here. All right. You shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. He calls them a family. God takes this disjointed, messed up group of people, these people who mess up their lives, whose people they complain, this disjointed strangers, strange people in many cases in here, takes them through water, leads them to a desert, takes them into his presence, and he calls them a family. He calls them his people. He says, you're mine. You belong to me. What he does is he makes them church. He makes them his church. This disjointed, this strange group of people become church. God's church that he makes. Past few months, been privileged to be able to travel a little bit. Back in August, Betty and I went on a cruise to Alaska, flew in and out of Seattle. And then in November, I went to see my mom for a few days and flew down there. And then a few weeks ago, we were at Universal Orlando and flew to Orlando and did Harry Potter World and all that cool stuff and walking around in there. And a couple of weeks ago, I'm sitting here talking with Betty. We're kind of rehashing the stuff going in here. And I make the comment, kind of reflecting back on those 3 trips. I say, you know, there's a lot of strange people in the world, aren't there? I mean, like, really strange. And I go, you know, I mean strange, like strange, you don't see this kind of strange in Cape Girardeau. She immediately stops me and she says, you obviously haven't hung out at the library enough. And you see these strange people, right, walking through in here. And I thought, this is representative of the church. Many of those people belong to a church. They belong to God in here. This different, sometimes messed up people with the different looks and nationalities and the way it looks as they belong to God. Listen to what John says, and he talks in Revelation. John, the Apostle John, gets to look into heaven. In Revelation chapter 7, he gives us a picture of what heaven is like. Listen to what John writes. He says, after this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. He describes and sit here and he says he's looking into heaven, the people in heaven surrounding God, worshiping him, and he says there's all kinds of different people here. All kinds of dress and all kinds of languages, all kinds of different looking people in here. In other words, using our language we're using this morning, there's a lot of strange people in heaven. And guess what? The church down here looks the same way. The people of God in heaven, there's a bunch of different looking people in here. They don't look all alike. And down here in his church, they all look different as well. I've had the privilege, so many different experiences. I remember the team is in Zambia. I remember, some of us can remember, Jeff, we were worshiping in Kenya that day on a trip that I went over there to. It was a Sunday morning over there, and we're worshiping under a canvas tent with a dirt floor in here outside of a church that was made of mud bricks in here, and we had teenagers, young boys, pounding out the rhythm of the songs on kettle drums. A few years ago, I was on a mission trip down in Panama, and we were on a Sunday morning. We were way out in the Tules. We were way out in the rainforest in the sticks. You know, it was 2 or 3 hours from anywhere to get out there. And we were out there, and there's this little bitty church, and it's way up in the rainforest, and it's stuck up on top of a hill. And the church has probably got about 20 people in it. And we're sitting there worshiping, and we're worshiping with, you Lutherans been at a Lutheran church, right? It's the old page 15 Lutheran church worship. It's a church worship service that dates back to 1941. If you're not with us, right? It's old stuff that many people grew up on. We were worshiping that service in Spanish. I've worshiped in large churches with thousands of people in there and a pipe organ about the size of this room. And the pipe organ is played well, and the pipe organ is blasting out there, and it sounds so awesome, it'll raise the hair on the back of your neck. It sounds so good. I've been with 30,000 teenagers standing and jumping up and down and singing at the top of their lungs to praise music that's playing so loud it gives you a headache. And you know the one thing it all has in common? It's church. It's God's church. And it's many and variety of way it looks, and the many and variety of people that are gathered in together. It is church. It's the family of God. Because God takes these people, these different kinds of people, these different walks of life and different nationalities and different backgrounds, and sometimes, yes, even strange. And he brings them into his church, and he does it through baptism. Old Testament, God used the Red Sea. New Testament, he uses baptism. And in baptism, he sits there and he says, "You're mine. You belong to me. You're part of my family. I'm stamping my name on you, my identity in you, my love wrapped around you. This is who you are. This is who you are, and this is who I'm making you to be in baptism." And because we are church, we love God, love others, and make disciples together. Yes, God is with us all the time, but yes, we're with each other. We're in this together. That's what it means to be church. We're in this together with God. This morning, our first service just before this, our first communion class, our sixth graders that have been through instruction, came to communion for the first time. I told them before they came to communion, I said, "Welcome to the table. You're part of his church. You're part of the church in here. This is where God feeds his church. This is where God feeds us. He fed you, his church, this morning. We gather around his altar. We gather for his body and blood. It's the way God feeds and nourishes and grows spiritually his church, is being a part of his table. About an hour from now, we're going to do maybe a few more minutes. Our confirmation class is going to be in here, and they're going to be sitting along the front row. Don't give away the tail end of my sermon, but I'm going to sit there and tell them, welcome. You need to understand something, though. You're not joining the church today, because you are church. You are church. You were church in baptism. That's who God made you to be. Yes, this morning you get to stand up. And yes, Friday you got to stand up and share your faith, which was great. Yes, they get an opportunity to stand up and say, "I believe this." And we're going to celebrate today. We're going to celebrate today for them. We're going to celebrate for the congregation. We're going to celebrate for the church. But ultimately, we're not going to celebrate what they've done, because that's not what it's about. What it's about is what the Holy Spirit's done. It's what God has done in their lives, and growing them and feeding them and nourishing them. It's what God has done in our lives, feeding us and nourishing us and bringing us together. Yes, it's a variety of different people, and yes, sometimes people in here looking around in this great big thing called church, capital C, look strange. But that's what God has done. God brings his people together. It's what God has done in feeding them and forgiving them and filling them with grace. It's what God has done in making you church. Amen.